All right, well, we're recording this, so if anyone has to leave or jump through and you end up missing anything, I'll be sending out the recording afterwards. I want to welcome everybody. This is our first Remo event, so apologies if there are any technical glitches throughout the event, or if you had a hard time getting in. Hopefully this will get easier as we use this platform more for our meetings going forward. So to give some a background, if you got emails about this meeting ahead of time, that means you have signed up for our hub. If you have not, just go to usergroups.tableau.com, find our user group and register. So subscribe for updates, which you can see down here on the bottom of the screen to make sure that you're getting all emails and notifications. Obviously, if you're here, that means you RSVP'd and created a Remo account if you did not have one. So we're going to do some introductions, introduce the speaker presentations, and then after we're done with the presentation, so we're all used to this, we're going to jump back into, you saw that open floor plan, and it's going to throw you back to whatever table you were at before this networking event. If you'll notice, the tables had topics. You don't have to talk about that topic when you're at that table. You guys can chat about whatever, and feel free. All you have to do to go to a different table, if you so choose, is double click on a seat in that table if there's one open, and I can answer questions as we get back. So please stick around afterwards for some networking. Our speakers will also be here to chat and answer any questions that you may have for them. Some quick Tableau happenings. I tend to do this before all of our meetings just to highlight some of our community events that are coming up. A new one that I found out is this public policy viz. So again, just a Tableau community project dedicated to bridging the gap between analytics professionals and policy practitioners. Just wanted to highlight this one. There is a link to the site, and I'm sure if you Google public policy viz, it will come up. So check it out if that interests you. We've talked about the Data Book Club every time. Their summer selection right now is Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. Even if you're not in the book club, it's a good place to check and see what people in the community are reading, and you can read it on your own too if you don't have time to do the book club. We've also talked about Back to Viz Basics. So this is run as a weekly event, and this week it's building a tree map. So again, if you're new to Tableau, or if you're not new to Tableau and just want a refresher on different chart types, check it out. And it's a fun sort of viz building activity that you can do weekly to sharpen up your skills. And then just wanted to point out on August 12th, so next week, there's a data analytics career summit. So feel free to check these out. And like I said, I'll share these links after the meeting if you're interested. The other thing I wanted to point out, I always try to show or announce all of the community events. There are a ton of them now. So they're, whatever you're interested in, there's probably a community event for it. So please check them out. If you joined the Q2 booster event, I just stole this. This was like one of their title slides, just because I think it's a very good visual representation of a ton of the Tableau community projects. And I also put a link to that. So please check them out. Game Night Viz, there's basically a community project for everything. So make sure you're getting involved, and there's plenty of help. Who are our speakers? So Ray is going to be up first. He works at Highmark. He's going to be talking to everybody about his Iron Viz journey and what he went through, how he did his submission, a tour of his dashboard, and any lessons that he learned. Following up Ray, Lindsay and Autumn are going to be talking to us about prototyping and how actually incorporating wireframing into your development can increase and can help you increase the efficiency and decrease the time to inception and product delivery, and just generally help you build better dashboard designs. As a reminder, so during the sessions, please keep yourself muted. Similar to if you've ever joined a Zoom meeting for these, you should see in your upper right-hand corner both a chat, say hi, tell us where you're from. But please, if you have any questions during the sessions, I am one person and I'm the only one monitoring it. So please throw questions in the Q&A and I'll be happy to get those answered during the sessions. So without further ado, let's begin. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for inviting me. Let me do the share here. This share. And can you see my screen?
Can.
Awesome. So I'm going to be jumping back and forth, folks, between the actual dashboard out on Tableau Public. Well, let me just reintroduce myself first. Yes, I am Ray Givler. I work for Highmark as a senior decision support consultant, but I actually live in Central PA. Highmark is, of course, in Pittsburgh, where the user group is centrally located. I'm going to jump back between the actual Viz, Tableau desktop, where I'll show some inner workings, as well as this PowerPoint presentation, which kind of outlines everything I'm talking about. This is going to drive the presentation. So yeah, my Iron Viz journey. And if at first you don't succeed, at least you learn something. So that gives you a little idea as far as my final standing in the competition. But what I'm going to do is review my submission context, give you a guided tour of the dashboard, talk about some tactical lessons learned. And by tactical, I mean getting into desktop and showing you, a few details, and maybe not click by click, but getting a little bit into the inner workings. And strategic lessons learned are more about the contest itself. So in case you are really new to Tableau and are not familiar, what is Iron Viz? It is the annual global data visualization contest that Tableau runs. And it's scored on 3 different criteria: analysis, design, and storytelling. This past year, there were about 200 entries. I think the prior year, there were many more. I don't know if that was COVID related or what, but the competition is stiff, on anything on a global scale, and hundreds of thousands of users. But it is fun, and it is just a way to learn more, sharpen your skills, get your name out there. Excuse me. So my kind of moniker out on LinkedIn is the Tableau pragmatist, meaning I just kind of do what works. I post out on LinkedIn regularly about just day-to-day struggles, things that trip me up. So like, why did I even do this? Because I had originally kind of been opposed, believe it or not, to Iron Viz, because I thought, oh, that's all just like fancy pictures and fluff, and I don't even do that day to day. Like, I'm making business dashboards, but it's kind of to prove a point. Like, I tell myself, yeah, I could do that if I wanted to. If I really put forth the effort, I could do well. I thought this year that the theme kind of interested me, and I figured, why don't I go out and do it and see if I can really do what I say offhandedly that I can do. So that was the impetus for it. The time commitment, I had done one small other contest like this. They call it Tableau Day, contest amongst the Blue Cross Blue Shield affiliates, of which Highmark is one. And I got 3rd place in that. So I figured, wow, if I really work harder, maybe I can do this global thing. So I had put like 12 hours into that dashboard. So just like brace yourselves here, folks. I actually spent 60 hours on this dashboard in 1 month. Now, that said, I've heard some other like more infographics people who do it every day. They can create a dashboard like this, just like, and some guy said like 16 hours. So, I mean, if you're more like a rookie to the infographics and are making a lot of mistakes and throwing away a lot of ideas like I did, it may take a lot longer. Also, I had a little bit of a health scare in the middle of that whole effort where I missed 3 days of working on it. But anyway, I got it done pretty much the way I wanted to. So I'm happy with the idea or with the output. The idea itself, the theme this year was the visual arts. I always loved Star Wars. I saw it as a kid. I've quoted the movies kind of as a just personality quirk. And that's where the idea of this dashboard came from. The data behind it, some of it I made myself. You'll see it involves my own personal favorite quotes from the original trilogy, as well as, so all that I had to type in myself, and you'll see some more information about that later. There was IMDb, a poll data I pulled in from that. And then someone else had a dashboard on Tableau Public that had all the dialogue of the original trilogy. So I downloaded that and pulled that data source out and resaved it and loaded in here. So that's really the meat of what's behind the info here. And as far as like how I approached the story and analysis, I initially had like no real plan. I just put stuff out there, and there wasn't much structure to it. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So like broad strokes, when I first started this, I was thinking, wow, in the past I've seen, excuse me, dark backgrounds do really well. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do that. And that the long format does well. So I knew I was going to do that. And I knew I wanted to invite interaction. So I tried to design it around people really like clicking on stuff and exploring. I will distribute this. The question is probably going to come up, the PowerPoint deck. I'll post it on LinkedIn. If there's another way to get it to you, you can just write to me on LinkedIn. I'll give it to you, but I'll make a post about it and put it out there so everyone can have it. It has some hyperlinks to different things in it to facilitate you checking stuff out. So tactical lessons learned. Well, wait, I don't want to get into that yet. Let's do the whole tour. And Jennifer, if there's any questions, please stop me, or I'll just keep talking on and on and on. So here it is, personal and public favorite quotes from Star Wars, remembering the original trilogy through the spoken word. Some of the first things you'll notice about this is the star field. I pulled that from a NASA site. I think it was a Hubble image, which you can tell by the 4 pointed stars, which I didn't like the looks of. So I went around and like suppressed a lot of those. Also, it was kind of a gray scale, which I didn't like too much. So I made it blacker. And it was a little bit of fooling around to get that the way I wanted. And then when I resized the dashboard, it wasn't big enough. So the whole thing actually repeats, but that's kind of a detail behind the whole thing. So it's one master image, right, on the dashboard behind everything else. So to give you the tour here, it starts up here with R2-D2 and C-3PO, and the click on us to start your journey. Just putting that prompt there was an idea from someone who reviewed the dashboard, and I'll talk more about that later. So let's click on them and see what they have to say. So R2 projects this image a long time ago in a cinema far, far away. That's a kind of nod to the opening scroll of Star Wars. So I saw the first movie when I was 9 years old, and it really had a great impact on me. I loved it. And like I said, since that time, I like to quote the movies. I call the original one Star Wars. That's the title that was on the screen when I saw it. I don't call it A New Hope. I know it was renamed and it's George Lucas's movie, but I just don't do that. As far as the structure, which I finally landed on for this dashboard, is my quotes progress from top to bottom in the visualization, roughly in chronological order of the episodes. The analysis progresses from individual quotes through character and episode aggregations and ends with alliance level insights. And we'll see that more as I step through it. A few call outs here. For those not deeply into Star Wars lore, I pay homage to the series in a few other ways in the design scheme here. The red and blue colors for the dark side and the light side, I took from the lightsabers of Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi, respectively. The styling, and you'll see this, of the pop-up translucent war room displays, the pop-up quotes, I should say, look like the war room displays of the rebellion. And the concentric circles, I'll point this out again later, actually mark the quote location in the episode. So I will show you that. And the captions on these, when I show you, are in Arabesh, which is the galactic basic alphabet. And on each quote, you can click and it'll go out to a YouTube video at the exact point in the movie that has that quote. I think a couple of them have broken since I initially made this, but most of them are still working. When we click on locations, I pulled the image of the X-Wing dashboard from the original movie, and it puts the data inside that. So that was kind of a fun, gives you the idea of like flying around and being in the X-Wing cockpit as you explore. The font here that I'm using everywhere is U Gothic, which is the closest to the one that was used in the original text scroll. And even the outline of this help that I'm showing you is a nod to the scene. It's actually the first quote here, where R2-D2 projects an image of Princess Leia, and she asks Obi-Wan Kenobi for help. So that's the general overview of how to get through this dashboard. We start with my Favorite quotes indicated by these little icons. And let me say that every image like this, I made in Snagit. I pulled images from other places. I like combined these two droids. I made these circles. For every quote, I pulled the image of the point at which the quote is given in the film, and then put the circle around it, did those in Snagit. The planets, I pulled most of those from a Star Wars site and other images, and I even aligned all of them. This is attention to detail, folks, so that the light or sun is coming from the right. Some of them I had to flip 180 to get that to come out right. So let's look at the data here. My personal favorites, how do they compare with those that are public? 3 of them are in the top 10 or 10 or 12 here that I have from IMDb. These are in ranked order from IMDb. On any one of these, you could click on it and it will say the character that said it and the episode, its rank, and the total votes that got out in that survey. And you can click to undo that. For the quotes, as we go down through here, and I'm not going to go into all of them, just in the interest of time. For each one, I created this data, like what is a quote, who says it, what episode was it, where were they located when they said it, and that's a kind of attached another clickable thing here nearby to all the quotes. The emotion that quote evokes, and then use case, like how do I use it? So I'm pretty eccentric, and I actually quote the film in different life situations that remind me of what was happening, and that's one of them there. And you can click any of these to toggle. These are all these objects that are coming up, these are all buttons, right? They're all custom buttons in Tableau. And I'll go to a location here too. Oh, let me close that. I don't want that open below here. All right. So locations, here's what I was talking about, the X-Wing cockpit. So you may or may not recognize that from the film. I took the color. This is the targeting computer, if you'll recall, when we're going through the trench to blow up the Death Star. So I pulled the yellow and red off that. So wherever we have a location here, you can click and see a little bit about it in this X-Wing-like display. So let's go down to the second level here. I thought it'd be interesting to pull people in and let them see where any quotes are that they can think of. Right. So if you're not a super fan, you may not know any quotes. This is one from Yoda right here. If I hover, it says, strong as Vader, mind what you've learned, save you what can. If you don't know, if you don't know any quotes, you may at least know character name. So you could type in like Jabba for Jabba the Hutt here. And this will show you, I have 3 lines here. Each of these is a timeline for the movie. And then the star is where the quote occurred. If we go to the last one here, this is Luke saying, Jabba, this is your last chance, free us or die. Well, if you know the story, you know what happens there. So you could use that, fool around, play with it a little bit, and investigate different quotes. Next step, well, I could show you one more quote here. Here's another one, Red 5 standing by. And what I alluded to earlier is like this. See this graph right here with the target in it? That is actually a modified version of this same graph where the quotes are located. It's just a different color and a different data behind it to show where the quote is and get this target. And yes, some of these I do in weird situations, like I'm going to pass someone on the highway. I actually do say this, Red 5 standing by, and then I pass them. So moving on, you may wonder, like, I had to address this, where is may the force be with you? Because that's the quote everyone thinks of. The problem is, and I address it here in the text, is there's multiple variants of it, and they're said in different places, so you can't really attribute it to one person at one time, so it's kind of hard to put it in the favorite quotes or get an appropriate ranking because of that nuance. So moving on, who are the most quotable characters? And this is interesting. So if we look at the IMDb poll, Vader has the most favorites, followed by Han, and on down here you can see the counts. But the characters do not speak the same amount. And you'll see in general that the good guys, right, speak a lot more. We can see that from the center column here, characters with the most spoken lines. And then, excuse me, the dark side speaks less. And what's interesting, though, although Darth Vader, and we have the analysis below it, dominates the basic count of favorites while saying relatively little, Admiral Akbar ties Vader for first place when the data is normalized. So we see this a lot in analytics where we want to normalize data based on some denominator. So if I divide all these by the number of spoken lines, and the line here is really like an instance of them talking. It's not a number of words, it's a number of times they speak, but nonetheless, excuse me, Admiral Akbar comes out exactly the same, 7.14, same as Vader, because he has 1 out of 14, which is the same as 10 out of 140 for Vader. So I thought that was a interesting coincidence. So moving further into the analysis, how do the episode ratings correlate with the favorite quote count? So I went out and looked at Rotten Tomatoes and the IMDb movie ratings. They both had in the same order. Empire was number 1, and then Star Wars and Return of the Jedi. The quotes didn't quite align with that. Not sure why it is, but Star Wars actually had a few more or a higher rate of votes per line than the than Empire. Excuse me. So in the analysis, I say at the bottom, that same thing. And do good stories yield good quotes or vice versa? Or is there a third factor? Is it correlation or causation? The debate rages across the galaxy. So trying to be a little quippy there, I guess. Then I take the analysis one step wider, and this is kind of the quotes don't necessarily line up with the analysis. It's just kind of an independent timeline, a subplot. We have Yoda to the left here at Dagobah and some of the favorite things that he said there. But what we noticed in what I did here is created an icon for each of the 3 films and plotted the favorites over time and normalized the start and end points to see if these kind of lined up at the points in the movie. And it's interesting, like you have almost 3 in a row here in Star Wars, like the Empire Strikes Back symbol, that's supposed to be Han Solo frozen in carbonite. So if you click on on the legend here, we can see the individual movies. So it seems like there is some clustering, and even across the films, and there are gaps, like nothing at the beginning. Here's another lull in the middle. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting point. Lastly, at the highest level of aggregation of this data is it a dark side or a good side quote, right? So is the dark side stronger, which is actually a quote from one of the films. It's Luke in The Empire Strikes Back. So the percent of favorites, right? There's more for the good side, but the percent of dialogue is even greater for the good side. So if you normalize by that, the dark side actually is stronger. But, and this gets into, there's always nuance in data, right? Well, what if we count Vader as a good guy, which I have in this little parameter right here? If we flip him to the good side because of his deathbed conversion at the end of the series, then the good side wins. So I end the analysis down here with yet another quote. Many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view, which Obi-Wan Kenobi said. And lastly, I do have credits down here, and I pulled the schematic image of the Death Star from the first film to be my icon for that. So in there, I give credit to the people who gave me some feedback on this, and I'm going to talk about that more in a moment when I get into the details. I'm in a Tableau hoodie there with my lightsaber that I got from Disney World, and my data sources are listed. So that is the tour itself from top to bottom. Are there any questions in the chat about how the dashboard itself functions?
questions so far, Ray.
All right. Let's get into some lessons learned. What happened when I tried to get through this thing? What came up for me? This is interesting. This just came up at work today. So rendering, right? Rendering always differs on server. It's created with a different technology. So there are always slight differences. This one on the left, I wanted to have rounded bars. This has since been corrected. And they had this weird, like using the easy rounding method, it had this strange like overlap in it. So I had to abandon that. What came as one line in Empire Strikes Back in one of my images was 2 lines on server. So, I mean, this is something I knew, but when you're doing something with a lot of floating objects and kind of pressing the limits on Tableau, you really need to check continuously if you're going to do this in Iron Viz, or you could end up with a lot of like little tweaks to do. Another thing I noticed is resizing your dashboard is the formatting kiss of death if you have a lot of floating objects. So what I mean, I originally had this like, excuse me, 3,500 pixels tall. Or maybe it was 3,000, one of the two. And I expanded it to 5,000. And when you do that, Tableau just automatically resizes everything, and you have to go in there and edit everything. So it would be nice if it did that like optionally and prompted me. Like I would rather keep a lot of things their size and move them around. That's what I wanted to do, but I had to both move them around and resize them. Anyway, you also want to work from back to front to avoid a lot of changing of floating order. So if you're not familiar with that, like everything on here, when you're adding objects, has some sort of floating order. So if I had put, let's click on desktop here on Luke and see this quote comes up in front of this container, right, that has everything in it. But if I like moved that, it's like, say I put this in last and the floating order was in the front, and then I click on this, like it's obscured by the graph. So you really can save yourself effort if you can work back to front. I think because of the iterative nature that I was working, that I really couldn't see that far ahead really to do that. So I ended up with significant changing and floating as I went through it. Probably less as I went on, as I realized how much work I was creating. Another item, color containers rather than multiple sheets within container, and opacity to dim. So what I mean by that, and I am doing it here. So I have the whole container selected. So if we look over here in the layout view, I have these elements of the container, but the container itself, I have it 50% grayscale. So it's on black and 50% opacity. And what that's doing, 2 things. 1, I have to color fewer objects, right? And 2, the reason I'm doing it is to dim out the stars because they were so bright and made the text hard to read on any text that I had there. So that's one set of lessons learned. Moving on. This is 2 of 5. G for grid lines. I usually don't use this that much for work dashboards, but you can just hit G like I did there. Hopefully, I don't know if there's enough resolution for this to come through, but you get grid lines. Helps you to line things up in your layouts. I kind of knew it, but hadn't used it that much before. And where I primarily used this here was in counting the spaces between the different graphs and trying to get them to be approximately the same. View or show cards. All right, so just fooling around with the different cards that are available on a, let's go to this. You're gonna see something funny here when I go here. Yeah, I only colored in one space, but the ones that aren't colored are the default white, so it's kind of hard to read, so it's a trade-off what I was doing. But the point here was I had turned off some cards and couldn't get them back on it. Like, I never even use this show hide cards here. So if you're not aware that button exists or you always look past it, that's there. Excuse me. You can also right click in any gray area here to bring a card back up if you have closed it. And that includes even the little tiny gaps like between this. If I right click there, you can still get that menu. Turn off selection highlighting. So that's on this sheet itself. Actually, it's part of the, let me show you what I mean. Turn off selection highlighting. If you're in a regular dashboard like this, right, and if I click East, this is Superstore data, see how it grays out all these other items? That sometimes doesn't look so good. So if I wanted to do that here, what I had to do is create a dummy variable, dummy to stop highlighting, right? And then over here, if I go dashboard, actions, stop highlighting. So what it does is on select for this graph, I highlight selected fields, that dummy field, which isn't even on the view, it's only in detail. So then it tries to basically highlight nothing so that when I click a single item, it only highlights the item I'm on rather than doing that graying on all the other items and kind of throwing off my coloring. Turning grid lines back off there. All right. Reshow field. All right. At some points I was using field labels on the rows. I ended up discarding that. This is one of the things where I wish the interface used different nomenclature. To me, those are headers. I think the naming of headers and field labels is reversed from what it should be. And I have a post about that. If you want to see it, you can click on this link later. But the way to turn them back on, you can do it through the menu, system analysis, table layout, show field labels for row. I'm not going to click through for that. What I did to label these, let's go into one of the quotes. To create this label section over top of this graph, we can take any quote. Let's take this quote and go to this graph. So this is actually an annotation, okay? And it's an annotated area of the graph. And then I just have all these items. Let's go to the actual worksheet. From my data source, I have all those elements on text. And that's enabling this annotation here. So you can see all the details about the quote. And then that's just sitting on top of this graph. And I'm going to talk about, I think this is my next point here, how I made this thing. Yes, the target. So the way I did this is I had the original quote position. That's the like percent through the movie. So what I did is duplicated it 2 times. And then I put measure names on size, right? So and then I made the second and third copy of the quote larger than the original. And then that gave this target effect in the graph. And I actually made a mistake in this. I pulled this like kind of neon green from a Rogue One War Room screen rather than the icy blue, more icy blue color of Empire Strikes Back, where they also had a War Room screen like this. Excuse me. Also, I learned I don't make many constant reference lines at work, but that's something I did here, and that's how some of these came into being on the other graphs, like right here where I have Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. So if we go into this graph, oh, it's going to be a little hard to show. I'm going to have to, not hard, just a few steps. These are reference lines, right? So Star Wars. So it's just a constant with a value. Star Wars is movie 1. The values are just 1, 2, 3 there. You can see from the graph. And then it's a custom label. And it's just Star Wars. And that's how I got that there. I mean, you could have done it with a floating text box too. As always, there's lots of options in Tableau for ways to solve a problem. What else? How colors actually work. So this is interesting. Let's go into maybe, doesn't matter which. I think I have a blank. That's another topic. That's a blank container over top. Let's go into this one. So we have colors, edit colors. So this thing, what you have is, like, I never really fully understood this before. So hue is your color of the rainbow across the top here. And so if we go back and forth like this, we're primarily changing hue. Saturation is up and down for those who don't know it. And that is like how much of the color exists versus a washed out gray. All right. So that's your 2 by 2 dimensions here. And then on the right, we have the value, which is basically just how black is it. So, or it's kind of the inverse. So 0 is totally black and 255 is not. And then when you create a color you like and you want to save, you can just drag it. And I didn't know this either. Like, I'd used this so many times. You can drag the color over here for custom colors. And then you have it. So, oh, another point, no single correct color in images. So I was talking about how I pulled the lightsaber colors and that war room color. And if we go to the main view, even at the top here, this is kind of where I noticed that Star Wars, like, I wanted all my text that same color. So I grabbed the color and made some text, and then I tried to, I somehow lost the color and I tried to get it again and it came up different. Well, this is from the original movie. I pulled it off that, and it was made in some like analog fashion. I'm sure it wasn't digital at the time. So if you use the color picker, let's do it as an example. Let me see if I can find another good example in here. Let's just take this. Yeah, because that's nearby. And more colors. And I was using the color pick screen color. Like, if I go through here, you'll see different HTML values for all the different yellows in here. So I guess bottom line, the lesson to learn is there is no one correct color for some things. It's a mashup of different gradients. So just pick one. And that's what I ended up doing. I was trying to just looked at it and what looks like it's really a good representation of what I'm going for. Legend highlighting. Okay, so I showed you this already, but let's jump back over to it. I swear this used to be the default function of how Tableau works, and you didn't have to turn it on, but I did turn it on here. You can just, by just right-clicking and highlight selected item, then I can click each of these movies. And if it's not engaged, then, you know, clicking this will do nothing, but having it engaged then will highlight just those elements for you. Here's an important one to realize. New sheets are added to actions. So I added some dashboard actions later in the process here. Let me close loop down there. Oh, I forgot. I'm in Alt click. I'm in desktop. So here, I think it was where I'm clicking this and this other little worksheet is displayed. Just remember that any sheet you add after that is also automatically added to that same action. And I had either forgotten that or never realized it because I put the actions on at the end, and I didn't this time. So I was clicking that and other weird stuff was happening down in my other screens, and I was wondering what was happening. So something to keep in mind. Conditional labeling. You'll notice that in some of these values, like it, because I was using black on the blue, right? Some of the numbers stretched out into the black background and it did not look good. So I decided I just was not going to print the values at all if they didn't fit. So the way I did that is let me see here. I have public favorites, hide small. Oh gosh, am I even going to be able to? Yeah, here it is. Let's edit that calc. So all it does is it sees if the calc is greater than my cutoff. And if it is, show it. Otherwise, well, I don't have an else. And if I don't have an else, it means it's null. And if it's null, it's not going to show anything. And that's what I want. So that's the solution. So again, the whole purpose of that is so it didn't have a number that was being cut off and by the end of the bar. Map options. So originally, well, let me explain. The way I did these, oh, let's go with the Millennium Falcon. That's a little better. Millennium Falcon, I added some extra text in this one, like the hyperdrive class, that 0.5. That's another quote from the movie. It can go 0.5 past light speed. But the point here is that this is actually a custom map, okay? And on that map, let's go to the sheet. On that map is text at a given XY position. So I have all that showing up here. And what was happening on the dashboard is that my map options were still showing up here. So I had map options. Let's just turn them on so you can see them. Boom, boom, boom. And like, I didn't even realize they were there on Hover. And Sam Parsons, who reviewed this for me, included me into that. And these are actually controlled at the individual worksheet level. So you have to turn them off for every one. And I have 12 of them here. It's not a global thing. And another thing, just as a side note, you get like one background map per data source too. So that kind of threw me off. I had to duplicate a data source to do something, which I can't recall at this point. Combine map. Oh, I got 9 minutes left. I better hustle. Combine map backgrounds with text. Oh, I just talked about that. Blank object to measure remaining space. Quote finder. In some cases, I want to know how much space was left in a given container. So let's say we had this container. And see this little space at the bottom. So what I did is, like, you could put a blank object at the bottom, right? And then just look over at the layout and see the size of it. So 32, like that's how much was left. So it's just a way you can measure space if you didn't want to add up the individual elements of a container. Clustering in Tableau. That's something I originally, for those where did the quotes appear in the movie, I used Tableau clustering, but it got a little confusing because there were multiple clusters, and that was another suggestion from Sam to make those into icons instead. So I went with that. I thought that was a good idea. Prevent interaction with blank over sheets. And I just showed you one of those that I moved it to the side. I don't do that too much at work because most of the dashboards are interactive, but there are a few places here it is, where I didn't want people to interact with the data. So I put a blank over top to prevent that. That's kind of an old trick. Sheet related object placement. Now this is interesting. So I have this legend, and it wasn't originally there. So let's take it off. All right. And it's from this graph, right? So if I legend, if I try to turn it back on, where did it go? That's the question. That's my question for you. Where does Tableau put it? Well, see this? That's actually it. What I think it does is it puts it on the frontmost container of your dashboard. Although I am not sure. That's like a guess. So I had a hard time finding that originally when I first activated, like, where is it? And it was this tiny little thing in the corner there. So beware. That's an interesting quirk. Headers for a single measure. Because we're short on time, I'm not going to do that, but you can just drag measure names to the head of the column. If you have a single column of a metric, right? Tableau defaults to not showing the header on there, and you can get it to display by just dragging measure names. Here was one that, oh my gosh, this took me so long to figure out. I had 3 bar graphs, which looked identical on desktop, these 3. And when I rendered it on server, one was slightly different. And eventually, after a lot of looking, I saw the difference was one of my charts was set to automatic and was automatic mark type and was creating bars, but it wasn't actually set to bar. So when I set them all to bar, then they rendered as the same type. So set them explicitly and you will not have that problem. All right, strategic lessons learned. And I'm going to get into these a little more in the last 5 minutes. There's not too much more here, folks. Familiarize yourself with recent winners. Don't create derivative work. Don't use proprietary images. Like I did not finish in the top 10, and I noticed anyone else who used movie images did not finish in the top 10. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't that good overall anyway, but they warned you not to in the rules, so don't do it. Check your data. The actual data in IMDb had the one Vader quote from the wrong movie, and someone noticed it like on my Viz after I submitted it. I was horrified. So like I should know better. I'm a former software quality engineer, but it got past me. Now, if you're more of a infographics rookie like me, expect to try and discard a lot of ideas. I threw away probably over half my ideas on this. Just trying different things. How do they look? Is it possible? Can I get it to work? And, trying alternatives. Get continuous feedback from multiple people and get it as early as possible. And expect a lot of rework after expert feedback. So let's go on. I'll talk a little more about that. There's a link here you can have if you download this to the past winners. And lo and behold, 5 years ago in the top 10, look at this. Now, I don't know if I saw this and like it was in the back of my mind, but man, I have to admit, it really looks like I stole the design from this one, doesn't it? It's bad. So that may have hurt me as well. So check out the existing things, the existing or past winners for ideas, but be careful not to copy them. For the last 2 years, this expert feedback idea, Sarah Bartlett has run a feedback program. I was super lucky. I had Sam Parsons, who was a 2021 finalist. He committed to 15 minutes with me. He spent 40. He gave me a bunch of detail, like ideas, some at the level of just, hey, think about this. Others more like, you really ought to do this. And I like one of them is I increased white space, or you might call it in mine space, but by 50%. It was a lot more cramped. He said, like, find a real theme for your layout. The interaction prompts, which I mentioned in the tour, disabling the map controls, reducing my total font palette to 3 or 4. I had more. I'm not sure how many. Some ideas on formatting and that false highlighting. It was really, really super, super helpful. So I encourage anyone who competes to try that. So why a stunning Viz is important. Like, again, I said early on that I thought the whole Iron Viz idea was maybe misdirected because, most business users don't do this. But the thing is, like, people, when they see it, they assume you have more skill. So when I posted this on LinkedIn, it was my most popular post ever. I had people inviting me to apply for assistant director jobs. I had people asking me about consulting, and I was not much. I learned a few things, but not really significantly more skilled than I was, the month prior. But it's that perception. And this actually bears out in research that a more visually appealing Viz is assumed to be more accurate, and, you will be assumed to be more skilled. So I encourage anyone who's starting out to make something like this, an infographic, and put it on your Tableau public profile. So if you're looking for another job, people can see it. So what does it take to win or to be in the top 10? I don't know. I didn't do it, but check out the finalists and what they think. There's a couple links here, and prior co-champs and Adam Miko's opinion as a judge. And ultimately, to bookend the whole presentation, if you really want to learn, try to build something. And that's what I tried to do here, and I shared with you what I learned through it. So that is the end of presentation coming in under the wire. Is there maybe one or two questions that I could answer?
Yes, we got one. I think this is a good summary question. Desiree asked, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently?
Wow, that's a good one. I did think about this a little bit. One, see if I can get earlier feedback from a very experienced person. Two, try to plan out my layout a little better, because that and resulted in a lot of rework, both thematically, like I was talking about, how I eventually settled on the progression of the story, right? So if I would have got the story down a little better and the size from the beginning, that would have saved more time. And maybe what I did, I ended up hacking the data a lot. So I probably, I kept like not wanting to commit to reworking it. So I, like from a database standpoint, denormalized a lot and double posted information in multiple data sets. So I might have invested a little more time in establishing my data source as an easier to use structure. That's all I can think of off the top of my head.
Awesome. Thank you for the question. And thanks, Ray. This was great. I just want to reiterate, Ray mentioned he's going to share these materials. If he wants to share them with me, I'll also share them to our Google Drive afterwards. We'll make sure, and feel free to hang around after Lindsay and Autumn present, and you'll be able to ask him questions if you have them live. So now I'll turn it over to you, ladies.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Let's see if we can make this happen. That's not the screen I want. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Where's the PowerPoint, though? There it is. Wait, can you see it now?
Yes, I can.
Woo! Awesome. That's Autumn. Hello, everybody. All right. So Autumn and I are going to do our first virtual attempt at this presentation that we did most recently at the Tableau conference live in Las Vegas. So this is prototyping and how to build better dashboard designs. Let's see here. And the question we had, advance it. There we go. Okay. All right. So, hey, I'm Lindsay. I'm a senior consultant and design lead at Health Data Viz, Tableau visionary and public ambassador. And I've been using Tableau since 2014. So I feel like I lose track of how many years that is, but was that like too long? I'm also an adjunct professor at Temple University. I teach a course on data visualization, clearly, and a co-author of the book Visualizing Health and Healthcare Data. And I love design and prototyping. And so that's obviously why we're here to talk to you. And one of my favorite parts of the whole design process is that beginning phase. So that early start of that double diamond where you're interacting with clients, trying to understand, what they're looking for, and then developing a design that then later, I'll develop on. But I like that iteration phase where I can be pretty creative and explore all possibilities.
Hello, everyone. My name is Autumn Battani. I am a principal consultant at Page Data with the lovely Jen Hunter. I am also a Tableau social ambassador, and I co-lead a community project called Diversity in Data. I've been using Tableau for, I think, 4 years now, but I also think it's possible that I've been saying that for 1.5 years. So similar to Lindsay, not exactly sure on the math, but a while, but have only been prototyping, which is what we'll be talking about today, for about 1.5 years of that. And I wish I started sooner, but we'll get more into that later. Next slide.
There we go.
Some other things about me is I think a lot of my interests about the process are pretty similar to Lindsay's. I love getting to talk to the users, understand what their business needs are, and then turn that around into a solution. There's a heavy emphasis on communication there, and that's why I think prototyping is really great because it helps move that conversation along. But here are some other things about me. I don't like coding, but I like big picture thinking.
Sorry.
Lindsay's just very excited, as am I.
I'm like a little trigger happy.
But really passionate about design, and I think prototyping definitely benefits that process a lot.
Yeah, so Autumn and I combined have created over like 150 public visualizations and clearly countless others for clients and blog posts and videos. You should go look at Autumn's blog. It's pretty fantastic. But so, I think we're okay qualified to talk to you guys about prototyping. We both do this in not only our day-to-day work, but even sometimes with our dashboards for public consumption too. So there's a lot of value that we believe in using prototyping to make these better dashboards. But before we can really start about the actual process of prototyping, I want to go over design thinking. So I'd ask you all, how many of you have heard of design thinking and know about the double diamond, but I can't see your faces. You can certainly raise your hand, but I found out that a lot of people actually have not heard about this as much as I would have thought. So this is the design thinking double diamond. And really, this is what I use in my work with clients in terms of how we go from a problem to an actual user-centered solution. So the first phase of this double diamond is this discovery phase. And that is where you start to come together with your clients. You start to ask them a lot of questions. This might be where you do some user interviews with stakeholders, trying to get a big picture on who they are, what they need, what are their metrics, what are their problems, what are their pain points. After that, you kind of diverge away from them and think through some of this. And then we come back to define and making sure we're all on the same page about what we just heard, right? So that's where we kind of go back around that feedback and make sure that we understand what they're saying so that we can take all that information into our design and development phase. So once we kind of understand the user's needs, then we can go into the second double diamond, which is actually 3 different phases. So it's prototyping, testing, and ideating. And in the prototyping, that may be where you've taken everything you've learned from the discovery and definition phase and you build designs. So that might be low or high fidelity designs, but typically maybe in Tableau, maybe in another tool, but you're really designing first, right? You're getting some ideas on the page and thinking through how to solve their problem. The next is testing, and that's where perhaps at different phases of your prototyping, you will test with your users to make sure you're on page, right? You're on track with what you think you heard that they need. After testing, then you go back around and ideate again, because now that you've learned some stuff, maybe you have to change some things around. And you kind of go back through this loop until the product, or in this case, dashboard, is complete and is going to meet their need. And then you deliver that solution.
So we're going to go through a lot today. We're going to talk about why you should prototype, how to go about it, best practices. But before we jump into the deep end, we want a little set on what prototyping is to help you better envision where it's going to fit into your process. So prototyping is a complete user experience without a fully developed dashboard or any real data. It's the realization of the dashboard without some of those key components. Maybe you're not in your tool of choice yet. Maybe you don't have the data, which we're going to get more into a little bit later. Maybe you have both of those, but there just isn't a clear vision. Prototyping is going to allow you to jump in. It's just the high-level view before the development. As Lindsay covered in the design thinking methodology, this is post or the discovery and the definition portion. And we know at this point what we're hoping to get at the end of the build, but that doesn't mean we know what it's going to look like. With prototyping, we're creating a low fidelity concept, but pulling in some of those metrics, the charts, the layout, the interactivity to give a better picture to your users. And why does it occur here? Well, it allows us to get feedback, the necessary feedback, honestly, to create as useful a product as we can for our stakeholders as early as possible. Like I said earlier, communication is a really big part of the overall process, prototyping and throughout the rest. I always say that you could be the best developer in the whole world, and if you aren't good at communicating with your users, you're just going to build them the best dashboard that they don't need. So being good at the communication piece isn't about getting it perfect the first time. It's about listening to their needs and their thoughts and being able to work with them towards a perfect or close to perfect solution.
Yeah, exactly. And, another important part of why you would prototype is that, clients can communicate their ideas from their head, or you can communicate, hey, I'm going to make this great dashboard and we're going to have, this chart over here. And then when you click this button, it's going to do X, Y, or Z. But that's very hard for someone to take someone else's, obscure thoughts and say, yeah, all right, I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense. And particularly with users or stakeholders who aren't the ones that are developing in Tableau or know Tableau well, for example, they may have a really hard time conceptualizing what things are going to look like, where things are going to be placed, and how they're going to interact with it. So prototypes help make those ideas really tangible and perceptible for the end users, so they can more accurately say, yeah, that actually looks great, that works, that makes sense, or no, it doesn't. That's not going to fit with how our users think about, the data. So we've said a little bit here, and you may be thinking, well, Autumn and Lindsay, this sounds like an extra step to my process. Like I normally just develop, or I get the data specifications, and I just go. So won't it just take me a whole lot more time? And so we believe no, it actually won't. In fact, I think it will reduce the time that you have to take for the whole process when you put in that upfront work with your prototyping. What happens if you don't prototype? Might as well tell you, maybe you don't do this in your process and you don't think you need to. That's fine. But let's just talk through this then. So if you don't prototype, kind of like I alluded to, you can just jump straight into that development. And we all know that's pretty exciting. We love getting into Tableau, getting our hands dirty. And, before I really prototyped, this is what I did. I would design while I was developing, which means I was thinking through charts and colors and layouts and navigation and all kind of elements about the design while I was in Tableau. But that also meant that I spent, or you may spend, extra time building in or adjusting your dashboard and the interactivity. For example, if you build something and you're like, you know what, I really should have had a different color for this whole dashboard. Well, that takes a lot of time in Tableau to change everything, particularly if you have multiple worksheets and dashboards. So there's some things that prototyping will help speed that up. So what happens if you don't prototype again? Well, you can show the client that final development together. So those stakeholders, you can say, look, built this wonderful dashboard. Look how it works. Isn't it fantastic? Don't you want to pat me on the back? But if you haven't actually brought them into the design process, they're probably not going to be in the development process. That's why they hired you, right? If they haven't been a part of that, they may come back to you with a lot of design and development change requests. And that just takes extra time on your end to fix those, move things around, adjust the charts, whatever. And another one is you could then also release your dashboard to the users after. Let's say the stakeholders are like, yeah, this design looks, your development looks pretty good. We think our users are going to love it. And then you can provide that dashboard all ready to go to those users. And then you come to find out it doesn't actually solve their problems, or it doesn't function the way they think through, like I said before, think through their steps in the process for their data. And then you end up kind of back at square one again. And we don't want our clients to look like this sad little pug. He is cute though.
So you may be at this tug because you're already prototyping and you want to learn more. You may be here because you're skeptical about prototyping, but you're interested in getting into it. You may be here just because you're really passionate about Pittsburgh. Not really sure, but in case it's the second one, in case you are skeptical, we are going to dig a little deeper into why prototyping is important to really hit home its impact. People get very excited about the idea of analytics, which I understand. I am people. And, they want to get started right away, which is really great, but development can easily be a game of hurry up and wait. All of the necessary pieces might not be ready when you or your stakeholders are, and prototyping can help fill that gap. When we call back to design thinking, this is an opportunity to discuss how the solution will come together, and it's not as dependent on as many factors as the actual build is. So if you guys are really excited about the prospect of what this dashboard can be, and you want to keep that momentum and that excitement going, this is a great option, and you can start even sooner than if you had to, say, wait for the data. So let's say you are in a situation where you're waiting for the data and it's not available. This could also be a great opportunity to communicate your needs for the data structure or included fields. Being able to dictate some of that stuff can help reduce the need for joining or complex calculations down the road, which can really help speed up your build time overall. It's also a great jumping off point to not only discuss what's wanted, but also what's realistic. Like I said, some people get really excited about analytics, and sometimes that means that they're asking for things that maybe don't exist within their ecosystem. So this is also a good time to be sort of a liaison between the business users and the data engineers when you're communicating what those needs are. And to really hit it home, like I said, users can be really excited about analytics, and they really want to get their dashboard, and they probably want it right away, or they actually probably wanted it a week ago, but that's not always going to be possible. So the second best thing is to let them know when they can expect it. Prototyping provides a roadmap, and the benefit of that is it allows you to better estimate timeframes because you know exactly what you're building towards. You can break it down even and use your wireframe as a reference to let them know when specific pieces are going to be available, so they can play around even sooner. And this will make it even easier for them to get buy-in from other users that they may want to test.
And it helps you complete user testing earlier. So this, instead of testing or checking with your users after you've already gone through that whole development phase where you're already in Tableau and building, you can actually put sketches in front of users really early on. They don't even have to be, high fidelity or, really well thought out. It could be just, hey, we want to make sure we get the right metrics on the page. We want to make sure we understand your hierarchy of navigation from this dashboard to that dashboard. And they can provide some feedback really early on. And then even once you get into some higher fidelity prototyping, again, even before you have a dashboard to have them actually interact with, you can put that in front of their face. So you can constantly be testing, and that way you're iterating all the time. So you're not having to do a big overhaul at the end. This one is one of my favorites because it helps prevent scope creep. And I think this happens quite a bit if you don't have prototyping in your process. And I think part of the reason for that is that when you're doing design and development at the same time, there's really no line in the sand to say, hey, we all agreed on this design and this framework for our dashboard or suite of dashboards. And so clients can come back more easily and say, I want this added, or I want that added, or I want this changed. And you don't have something to refer them back to say, well, we are all agreed on this. So when you do prototyping and you have a design, often you can have this design sign off or a design document and saying, this is what we're going to agree on. Great. We're going to move into developing this exact product. And then anything that comes that's outside of that is outside of scope. And then you have something to fall back on to say, what, that's not what we designed. It's not part of the scope. And we're going to move forward like this. And lastly, it helps you to build faster in Tableau. So we'll show you this at the end, but with a good design and a good prototype, a developer, whether it's you, the same person who did the design, or somebody else that you're handing it off to, or you're the recipient of a design, it's much easier to just build from that blueprint, essentially. And it saves you a lot of that thought process of what should I do? It's all kind of laid out for you right there. So the next is, so when we talk about these prototypes, how much effort is really necessary? And some of this depends on what stage you might be in. So there's essentially 3 levels of fidelity, right? Low fidelity, which are the sketches on the back of a napkin, right? They might be just some in Excel. something like that, where not everything's quite fleshed out. You're just trying to get some ideas on the page as you're playing around. The second is medium, and that may be where there's a lot more, things are kind of fleshed out of like, hey, we are going to have maybe this type of trick, or we're going to have our title here. We're definitely going to put our filters on this side, right? So it has some blueprint-ish qualities to it, but it's not completely fleshed out yet. Like I said, you can see, it might lack color. It might lack some of the clarity of exactly what comparisons might be, things like that. And then obviously a high fidelity prototype is one that would have all the elements, and it would look essentially exactly like what you're going to build. And in fact, depending on the tool that you end up using, some tools do allow you to add interactivity and kind of provide stakeholders or clients some insights into how this actually would look in Tableau or respond in Tableau. So at the early stage, this is kind of in that double diamond, where you're in the maybe even in the first part of the diamond, and you're kind of really trying to understand things. So you could still do prototyping here in this early stage, and that tends to be on this low fidelity and low interactivity, where you're just drawing some things out and just making sure you're testing some alternatives. Maybe you're checking out some layouts, thinking about what metrics might go where. So that doesn't have to be anything special. Like I said, it could be a hand-drawn sketch, something in Excel, something like that. So in the post-design phase, so this could be perhaps that a client may have come to you with some sort of design, like, hey, we do want these things on this page, we do want this interactivity ability, we do need these filters, we do need this data or whatever. Or perhaps you've already gone through some early stage designs, and now you really need to put some of this together for user testing or something like that. And this is where you might want a very high fidelity, and it can range on the level of interactivity, but this is where you can get feedback on a design. So you want it to look pretty close to maybe what you're planning on developing, so that you can get some information from end users of, does this make sense? Can you use this? Do you think this is going to meet your needs? And lastly is pre-development stage. This is before someone's going to literally take it and build it in Tableau. And so often if a designer is handing it off to a developer, here's where you want both a high fidelity, so it looks just like what you're building, and also has high interactivity, or at least if you don't have a tool that can show interactivity, that you have described out everything that will be interactive. Sometimes, you know Tableau better than stakeholders or clients, and so you may know that, hey, yeah, that is a button that's going to have a parameter action, and it's going to change this chart, right? But someone else may not know what the resulting action is, so you want to make sure that you can communicate that to the developer.
So you know the what, you know the why. We just talked about the level of effort and the fidelity that makes sense at different stages. And you're probably thinking, I don't know how I've gone this long without prototyping. And we get it, because we felt that way too when we first started it. And you're also probably wondering how you can get started after you've decided to integrate this into your process. And the next step is picking a tool. But like most things, it depends. It's not one size fits all. So rather than tell you what tool is right, I'm going to talk to you about some questions that you should be asking yourself to help figure it out. So the first question is, what's the barrier to entry? This is going to be fairly personal to you as a developer. What we're trying to get to the bottom of with this question is, how easily can you get started? Some things to consider here are, is it within the available technology at your organization? Is there a cost associated? If so, what's the process to get that approved through your company? Do you already know how to use this option? I personally think prototyping is worth the time investment to pick up a methodology that works for you, but that doesn't mean that you have the time right then. So if you need to hit the ground running, go with what you know. But as Lindsay mentioned, you can transition through a different option at a later stage. Question 2, what's the existing experience? We talked about how easy it is for you to pick this up, but this next question is about the people on the receiving end. What are their current expectations, if any, of what prototyping will look like? Are are you going with an option that will take some training? Again, I think it's worth the investment to get a good prototyping process up and running, but sometimes we are working against a clock, and that might not be realistic for you at the moment. Should probably be to no surprise that time is on this list. It's already been an integral factor in the past two questions that I talked about. But the last two were about getting there, and then this one's more about the actual execution of the prototype. So how quickly can you turn around an MVP? As we covered earlier, prototyping doesn't inherently lengthen your overall process, but it could if you're not being mindful about your choices. Another thing that's crucial to assess here is the update time. When people think about the time investment, they usually immediately go to, how long is it going to take for me to make? But remember that there's a heavy stress on iteration when it comes to the prototyping process, which means that you may be going back to make changes. So factor in how easy or hard that may be when making your selection too. Fourth thing to think about is how close is it to the end product? The only thing that's going to get exactly on the money is the actual thing, but there are some options that are going to get you closer than others. Decide where on the spectrum that you need to be to get the necessary buy-in and feedback from your users. And this is where, the principles that Lindsay just talked about around fidelity are going to factor in. And speaking of feedback, there's no better last question than what does it look like to share this out? How easily can you go about soliciting that feedback from others, circulating it, and like I said, with that iteration process, can you quickly send it, or is that going to be more of an uplift for you? So here we have some tool options. We have pen and paper, a whiteboard or whiteboarding apps, slides like PowerPoint or Google Slides, a wireframing tool like Figma, your BI tool of choice, so Tableau or Power BI. And we have sort of those 5 key components we just went through. The dots are indicating that particular option is good in that area. The half circles it's kind of good. It might not be good for everything. So we're seeing the half circles on time for pen and paper, for example. That's because it's probably going to be turned around very quickly. But like I said, with that iterating process, if someone asks you to make an update, you're likely starting over. If we're looking sort of towards the right end, we're seeing some that are going to be a little bit more accurate, but might have some losses elsewhere. So like I said earlier, it really depends on what your needs are. There are a lot of options out there. So ask yourself those 5 questions, look at what's available, and figure out what's going to be right for you.
Awesome. So as we're kind of rounding out this, we want to leave you with some of the best practices to prototyping, so that you can actually take everything we've kind of said and put this into practice. Wrong way. There we go. All right. So one thing that's really important with prototyping is really understanding the limitations of your data. You should know this beforehand. You might want to think about what's the lowest level of granularity that exists for this data? What metrics are available for this data? How often is this data going to be refreshed? Some of that stuff is very important because you don't want to design something that they don't actually have the data to fulfill. So for example, you're not going to design a trend chart by month or by day, for example, if all they have is annual data, right? You really want to understand this as you're developing, for many reasons. But if you're going to be giving this prototype to a client so that they can provide feedback, you want to have all these things right. So it's important for you to be asking questions. Secondly is, particularly if you're unfamiliar with the data, but I would say, even in general, be mindful about making up values, because clients, without a doubt, I've seen this a bazillion times, get very distracted by numbers that aren't even actual. So when you're prototyping, they say, well, that would never be, that value would never be that big, or, that's not the name of one of our providers or whatever. So you want them to focus on the design, the layout, right? The colors, the chart types, the overall experience that they will, have with this eventually built dashboard, not get fixated on some of the numbers or the words. So I would say, often it's just great to do kind of put in some hashtags or number signs or X's to indicate, hey, there will be a number here, and we will have a % here, and we will have values here that represent, the top 5 reasons for incoming calls. Things like that. it is helpful to nail down certain things, perhaps like maybe the name of the dashboard or the titles of things, or the exact metrics, for example. But where there are things that you may not really know all the details about, just leave those as a little more vague. And one other best practice is, well, this is not one other I'm going to share is communicate why you've done something. So instead of just showing a prototype or sending it off in an email, particularly if it's just, an image of something, you want to instead explain why you did certain things. Why did you make the design? And also explaining things, as I mentioned earlier, like any type of interactivity or, hey, there will be filters here, things that might not be completely obvious in a static, display or static image. And lastly, Tableau better than anyone else that you're delivering this to, most likely. And so you also want to be able to communicate the why behind your choices if it has to do with Tableau's limitations or strengths, right? There may be things that you would love to design or maybe your users wanted, but it's not practical or even feasible in Tableau. So you want to be able to communicate those when you share your designs.
Yes, and one of those key areas is probably going to be interactivity. A lot of the options that we discussed earlier don't really have the capability to layer that in, though a couple of them do. But even for the ones that do, it might not necessarily make sense or be worth the uplift. As Lindsay said, this doesn't need to be inclusive of everything, and it's not going to be as accurate as the final product, but it is up to you as the designer of the prototype and the developer to bridge that gap and help them understand exactly what those areas are that they will have access to with the final one that they're not getting with the prototype. And can't say it enough, communication is really important, and that means sign off. I think prototyping is also a great exercise for yourself if you just want to get some ideas down, but having this be an exchange means checking in with them and making sure, yes, this is something that's going to help support you, the business, the questions that they have, their function in their job. So getting sign off from key stakeholders prior to moving into development is really important.
Absolutely. All right. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. So we talked about prototyping all the way through, and now we're just going to close it out with showing you what this looks like. So Lindsay and I divided and conquered this. I took the prototyping part, so you'll be seeing me do this here in Figma. I'm not doing this live. This is a recording. I wish I was this fast. But, I had my requirements and I started to think through what is this going to look like when it comes together. I know Ray had talked about when he was doing his Iron Viz that one thing that he might have changed was knowing what layout he wanted to go with. So maybe he wasn't making as many changes in the tool on the fly. And this is where you can help with that a little as if you are going through that prototyping process. So here I am making some very quick fake bar charts. Like I said, there's no real data. I'm just putting it together to give the end user the idea of what it's going to look like. Gonna keep going. Elevator music. But as you can see, it's coming together really quickly because it's not exact. I'm just getting some ideas down, pen to paper, figuratively, though this is the internet. Have some KPIs, some trending charts, a table, so we can see, hey, this is a dashboard that I think is going to help. And then I kicked it over to Lindsay.
So let's see if I can. There we go. So what was great about this is, I got to go to the next slide. Hold on. All right. Advance. There we go. What's great is one of the things that I had mentioned earlier on is that it's a lot faster when someone else has given you this blueprint that you just have to follow. So I didn't have to make any design choices, and I knew exactly now with the data that I had what metrics I needed to make and where they needed to go, and then the charts or the KPI in the table that this was going to be. So you can see here, I knew what the layout is. I therefore was able to anticipate things like in Tableau, like, hey, I'm going to need to make these calculations. I'm going to need to put these certain elements into certain containers so I can really start at the bottom and make my containers, make all the charts, throw them in. It was a lot easier to do kind of that duplication of, hey, I'm going to do one KPI. I'm going to duplicate the formatting of it, switch out the numbers, duplicate it, right? So there was a lot of speed to being able to do these things with this blueprint, with this prototype in hand. So I think Autumn, right, you're yours took about like 20 or 30 minutes, right? To design like that. And this took me about 20 or 30 minutes to actually build. And I'll say, like, if I were just to do this, it would have taken a lot longer than 30 minutes. And it probably, I think, would have taken longer than the hour together, because I would have had to do a lot more thinking and might go back and forth on stuff. So there you have it. We built the dashboard. Okay. Woo! So that's all she wrote. But thanks for tuning in. I guess we sped through that. So if anyone has questions, or I will stop sharing somehow.
So nothing came through the chat. Oh, Ray actually asked one. He said, to what extent do Lindsay and Autumn present users with A/B options or ABC options when prototyping? That's a good question.
Oh, like multiple choices.
Yep.
I'll start. I tend not to provide choices, partially because I think, again, I've done it, I think, once, and I'm not sure it was a good solution. So I think clients then get confused of like, well, maybe I like this from this from this, and I'm not sure if you want me to pick one or like pick parts. And I think it makes the feedback feel a little confusing for the user. Like, they're not sure what they want. So I ended up designing one thing and then asked for a lot of feedback on that, and then redoing it and providing it to them again and getting feedback. So, you know, they're in the process with that one design. That one design, that first one, may not hit home at all. Like, there may be a lot of things that they need to change, but that's okay. I mean, I think that's part of that process. What about you, Autumn?
I tend to only provide options when they've made a recommendation that I don't agree with. Because as Lindsay mentioned, like, sometimes people have a hard time envisioning what these things are going to look like. So sometimes I will do both. I'll mock up the one that they said and mock up, you know, my suggestion, and put them side by side and say, hey, you know, I know that you wanted this. This is what that looked like, but I think that this is also a great option. So I just want you to take a look at both of them. And honestly, probably 9 times out of 10, they go with my suggestion, because it really was just that they came up with something in their head. In their head, it looked really good. But when you got it down, you know, on paper and showed it to them, they're like, oh yeah, I understand why you were making the recommendations that you were making.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you both. A lot of agrees and chats on that feedback. Again, if they provide me the slide deck that they shared, I'll also share that after this with the recording of this whole event, so you guys can revisit and kind of look at everything at your own pace. Before we jump back to the networking portion, I do have a quick few trivia questions. And I know somebody had mentioned that they were having a little bit of trouble with the audio. So I just whipped up a nice, very fancy slide here in PowerPoint. So 2 quick trivia questions to see if anybody, or, you know, who was paying attention. I have 4 and 2 of backups. So first one, how old was Ray when he first saw the Star Wars movie at the cinema? So first person to put in, wow, somebody got it before I even finished the question. So Rebecca, I do see your answer, and you are correct with 9. Can you please email me at pghtug@gmail.com, and I'll reach out to you with a prize. Second question, so get those fingers ready. While no animals were harmed in the making of this presentation, one was shamed a bit. This was Autumn and Lindsay's presentation. What animal was it?
Oh, technically I did do that.
Well,
I think we'll give that, because I did shame the pug.
Did we shame
I didn't call out the other one.
Did we shame the other animal too, Lindsay?
I didn't really shame him. He was there. So I'll say the pug was probably verbally shamed.
Okay, great. So Allison, congrats. We will accept the answer of pug. So please also email me so I can reach out to you with prizes. So I want to thank everybody. I think I have one more slide. Our next tug, I'm aiming for October. So depending on speakers, if you have been using Tableau, whether that's personally, professionally, and even want to tell your story, again, doesn't have to be 45 minutes like Ray walking through his Iron Viz journey, looking for anybody, 5 to 10 minutes, just telling us how you use Tableau. So now we're going to jump back to the networking event. You can, you'll see that the tables again are labeled. So if you want to jump and chat with Autumn, Ray, myself, or Lindsay, you can jump with us. Otherwise, enjoy, meet somebody in the community, say hi. I challenge everybody to meet one new person. So we will jump back there in a minute. Again, if you want to switch tables, all you got to do is double click on a seat.